What is the role of their deities and their pharaohs and pharaohesses? What do people in ancient Egypt believe and fear?
The ancient Egyptians seem to have left a legacy.
Their legacy stretches from ancient times to our own. Egypt's lifeline flows through the desert, the Nile. Even today, everything depends on it. At the time of the pharaohs, the country was divided into two parts, Upper and Lower Egypt. Survival is only possible if people do not cut off each other's water and unite under a centralized government. For 3,000 years, pharaohs and pharaohesses rule over the land. After 31 dynasties, Cleopatra is the last ruler. Among her predecessors, Ramses II, living god on earth. Or Tutankhamun, the one with the world-famous tomb. Yet in the beginning, around 3100 BC, the foundations of unified Egypt are laid by him, King Narmer.
The role of the pharaoh changed, I think, over time, over a long time, over the whole course of Egyptian civilization. But the repertoire of symbols and motifs for kingship was there, and it was adapted once somebody rose to the level where their household included not just the nome, not just their district, but all of Egypt, north and south. Then they could take on all the insignia and authority and charisma and spiritual power of kingship itself.
It's King Narmer who unites Lower and Upper Egypt 5,000 years ago. His emblem, the high white crown of Upper Egypt. The back of this ceremonial palette also shows him with the crown of his opponents, the red crown of Lower Egypt. United, they become the double crown of all subsequent kings or pharaohs, as they are later called. But it's not the time-old strategy of divide and rule that applies on the Nile. Instead, the pharaohs unite and rule. For generations, the kings and pharaohs of Egypt wear both crowns and maintain the unity of the country, under the suzerainty of the gods, as depicted on numerous temple walls.
The ancient Egyptian state, from the beginning, is a national state. This differentiates it from its surroundings. At that time, there were mainly city-states. For instance, Babylon in Mesopotamia. The national state in Egypt was very distinct because it was on one soil with one people. And this remained for 31 dynasties for a period of nearly 3 millennia.
King Narmer becomes the prototype of all pharaohs. They're depicted dominating the scene in a pose of power, as on the reliefs of the mortuary temple of Seti I, even 1,700 years on. Armed with a club, a battle axe, or a scimitar. Sometimes with bow and arrow on their chariot. The message is always the same. I, the pharaoh, am the sole unrestricted ruler of Egypt in war and peace. And of course, he's always the victor par excellence, slaying his enemies. Once painted in gaudy colors, the reliefs serve as propaganda for the autocratic hereditary monarchy of the pharaohs.
The hereditary monarchy played a major role in ancient Egypt, since it was hoped that it would provide stability for the country. The Egyptians assumed that with the creation of the world, its emergence out of nothing, there was an orderly world on the one side and a chaotic element on the other. So it was of paramount importance that the king did maintain order with the help of the officials attached to him. In other words, that chaos was put in its place.
Yet above all, it's nature that rules over Egypt. Every year, the Nile floods the narrow valley in the middle of the desert. When the flood recedes, fertile organic mud remains on the fields. Just as the Egyptians imagined the origin of the world. In the beginning, there's chaos. The earth is covered by water. There's nothing but darkness. Out of the floods rises the primordial mound. Then he crawls out of the egg. Atum, who begets himself, the god of creation, or as in the words of the Bible, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Greetings, Ra, perfect every day. The sun god Ra-Harakte brings light to the world. A palm tree and a lotus sprout on the primordial hill, and thus life begins.
The ancient Egyptians had several creation myths, and these came from different parts of the country. And later on, once the country was unified, they really had no problem in marrying them all together. But the core instances of all of these was to explain the natural world. And what is really interesting is that even in 3000 BC, a lot of what they were talking about is something that is almost now what is regarded as high science. So you have the ideas of the primordial slime and origins of all living things coming out of this ooze, which is again something we have. The idea of the darkness out of which came light, sort of like a Big Bang.
Atum produces sunlight and thus photosynthesis as the prerequisite of all life. The Egyptians praise him in their hymns. Well provided are the people, the flock of God. For their sake he created heaven and earth and pushed back the greed of the water. He created the air that their noses might live. His images they are, sprung from his womb. Atum then begets all other deities. He is the Lord of all, King of gods. Given that he becomes merely one among many, Egyptologists have counted no less than 1,500 deities. The Egyptians don't have a written religion, it's expressed in pictures. There are gods like Sobek, who rules over water, or mixed creatures both animal and human, like the jackal-headed Anubis. He guards the realm of the dead. Pairs of gods complement each other, like Sekhmet, the she-destroyer, and Ptah, the divine creator and thus god of the craftsman. There are incarnations of evil like Seth, the god of greed and violence, and of good, like his brother Osiris and his sister and wife Isis. There are deities for everything, for protection and help, yet also for death and destruction.
The ancient Egyptians had a huge pantheon of gods, and they were very inclusive, so they would add on gods. One thing that is really notable about ancient Egyptian religion is the duality, the concept of balance, which was also key to Egyptian religious belief and manifested by the goddess Maat, goddess of balance and order. For the Egyptians, it was very important to have this sense of balance because that kept the world in order. And you needed both kinds of energy for success.
The pharaoh has to provide for order and peace, if necessary by force, as is shown on the so-called Narmer palette. At his side, the falcon god Horus. According to the creation myth, Horus settles down on the palm of the primordial hill. The rulers themselves are considered mere mediators between the gods and the people of the Nile, as was the firm belief in ancient Egypt. 3,000 years on, a monumental temple is erected in Edfu in honor of Horus, the patron god of the pharaohs. Horus sits on the neck of the pharaoh as a constant companion, like here with King Ka-Ephra, meaning that his rule is divinely legitimized. This later gives rise to the idea of the divine right of rule of Europe's emperors and kings. Up until then, pharaohs are considered merely as acting the role of a god. They're only godlike when they hold office. Yet, there are rulers who want to be seen as living gods. While the first kings proclaim to be divinely inspired by Horus, King Rajadef has himself depicted as a son of the sun god Ra. Kings of the Middle Kingdom, like Senusret I, propagate their divine descent by building numerous sun temples. It's not until the New Kingdom that the ultimate upgrade takes place. Amenhotep III and his successors view themselves as gods on earth. Their monumental statues tower over everything and everyone. The title Pharaoh comes from their hieroglyph Per Ara, the great house or palace. Their statues are carved from the hardest and most precious stones. They're tremendous achievements of the sculptors and the workers. Once finished, they have to be transported and not least erected. In the great house, the rulers live far away from the Egyptian people, surrounded only by courtiers, their families, and servants. Often there may also be a harem. Since the accession, preferably by a son, must be secured, backups included. Only occasionally will the pharaoh show himself to the common people, in varying outfits. An athletic naked upper body is part of the standardized representation of any pharaoh. As the head priest, he wears the skin of a panther. Official dress code, however, is a skirt with an oxtail signifying animal strength, plus a necklace heavy with gold and precious stones. With crochet and scourge, he's the shepherd of the Egyptians. With a double crown, he's ruler over Upper and Lower Egypt. For less formal occasions, he wears the so-called Nemes headscarf. There's an artificial chin beard, even worn by female pharaohs. The gods of the Egyptians dwell on earth, in the Holy of Holies of the temples, where only the priests may enter. And the pharaoh, he who sees the gods. So were the pharaohs godlike in the end?
To the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was both man and god. The moment he is appointed pharaoh, he proceeds onto another level. He is revered and trusted by the people as the one who maintains communication with the gods. So without the king, the whole system does not work. It is important to note that the so-called God-king contains both sides within himself, that of a human being and that of a god.
The state doctrine of the godlike pharaoh is propagated by representing him as equal in size with the gods, often as a trinity, as here with the sky goddess Hathor at his right. Pharaoh speaks with the mouth of God, it is said. His words are considered divine commandments. And he shall rule as Maat, the goddess of justice, commands him. The naked shall he clothe, the hungry he shall feed, the quarrelsome he shall make peaceable. In return, the pharaoh may expect obedience, trust, and gratitude from his subjects. Our modern concept of individual freedom and equality does not yet exist. In the truest sense of the word, the pharaohs are kings of the sun. They are the children of the gods and rule in their place on earth. According to doctrine, they must rule justly. Yet, how absolute was their rule?
I think there was a certain degree of absolutism to pharaonic rule, especially in the early, more powerful periods, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, but certainly also in the Age of Empire and the new and 18th dynasty, 19th dynasty. And you just didn't question the ruler, even by custom. I mean, even today, you know, there's a natural respect for the leaders of our states. And certainly that was operative, but on a much more radical, extreme scale.
Meanwhile, an architectural revolution has taken place. Instead of bricks made of Nile mud, they now build with ashlars, pyramids for the rulers, and temples for the eternal gods. And due to the number of deities, there are also many minor sanctuaries, even entire temple cities, like the impressively preserved temple district of Karnak at Luxor. The Temple of Medinet Habu stands symbolically on the primordial mound of creation from which papyrus grew. Symbolized by columns supporting the temple's sky and its roof slabs with stars painted on them, each weighing more than a ton. Remains of paint testify that these dwellings of the gods were once colorfully painted. Temples aren't merely sacred places, they're also quite profanely used as a kind of tax office. However, instead of money, the subjects pay their taxes in kind, as coins do not yet exist. There are lists of tax revenues carved in stone, the amount of grain delivered, the number of amphorae filled with olive oil, or gold ingots for jewelry making. The temples own large stretches of fertile land. Although only goods are delivered to them, the Egyptian economy is organized in a surprisingly modern way.
We can say that Egypt was something like a planned economy. It was mostly going according to the rhythm of the Nile. So, the taxes were calculated according to the level of the Nile. We can really see these taxes as what we would call today an income tax. The temples were the ones that were mainly in charge of gathering and collecting the taxes. That's why sometimes we talk about temple economy.
Yet how can a central government effectively rule from Aswan in the south to the Mediterranean in the north? Egypt's formula for success is its coherence as a state. After King Narmer unites Upper and Lower Egypt by force, the country is divided into regions, later called nomes. At the head of each region is a district prince. He may, however, at times strive to break away from the central power. Yet usually, the pharaoh's club ensures the unity of the country. But how is it governed and administered? The pharaoh is considered divine, as is his rule. Egypt is ruled autocratically from top to bottom. Whatever ministers, government officials, and tax collectors do is as sacred as the words of the pharaoh. But even in ancient Egypt, there's opposition.
Of course, there were disputes. There were times when the royal house was portrayed by those who opposed it as not being able to properly communicate with the gods. Yet, there were surprisingly few civil wars and internal uprisings during the more than 3,000 years of Egyptian history. When such things did occur, they were often connected with problems caused by nature, which the pharaoh could not solve.
Then people turn to the deities in their temples. They must be well taken care of, since everything depends on them. In the belief of the Egyptians, the gods do not reside in some heavenly sphere, but are right with them on earth. A statue of Amen, most preciously decorated with gold. For Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, such statues are mere idols. For the ancient Egyptians, however, their gods are immediately present in their statues. As an ancient Greek writer noted, the Egyptians would bring the gods down to earth. What's special, Egyptian gods are not only receivers of sacrifices, they downright depend on the help of humans. The gods, personified by their statues, must be washed and dressed every morning by the pharaoh or the priests. And the gods of Egypt are hungry. Bread, olives, and wine are regular offerings. Nile geese and bulls are sacrificed to them, if only symbolically. Only the scent of the burnt fat rising to heaven is for the gods. The meat is given to the priests and their families as a reward for their services at the temple. For the ancient Egyptians, the world is in perpetual motion. Every evening, the sun god disappears into the underworld beyond the western horizon. Sacrifices must be made to him so that he will reanimate the world each morning. Year after year, the Nile flood comes to the desert valley, leaving fertile mud on the fields. Water management is one of the main chores of the pharaoh, since all his subjects are to be fairly supplied. Sacrifices to the gods ensure that there will be no chaos on earth. As in Egyptian society, there's a clearly defined hierarchy among the gods, an upper level and a lower stratum, made up of little gods for everyday worries and desires. Meseknet, for instance, with the sign of the womb on her head, is patron goddess of pregnant women. Or Bes, he protects women in childbirth from evil spirits. Above are the heavyweights, Amun-Ra, supreme god and patron of the pharaohs. Maat, the goddess of justice, truth, and order. To the ancient Egyptians, she embodies the fundamental values of life. You meet her everywhere, as a statue, on murals, and in temples. In tombs and on sarcophagi, she protects mummies. She bears the title Mistress of the Pharaoh. With her ostrich feather, she decides at the soul scale in the realm of the dead over annihilation or eternal life. Maat is the cosmic willed order personified. Royal texts teach the pharaohs how to rule. Even as children, they have to memorize the 42 commandments to keep. Do not be evil. Gentleness is better. Do not distinguish between the well-born and the lowly. Do not pass by a supplicant without hearing him. Rule justly by carrying out the Maat. Thus, Maat provides the guidelines for just rule. By them, those who govern can be measured.
Maat was a decisive concept of ancient Egypt. The king had to look for Maat so that he could fulfill his duties. Maat is not merely order, the functioning of the state. She stands for ethical norms that were precisely defined. And in part, they were much more precise than our 10 commandments.
The king, it is said in the teachings for Mary Carré, is appointed by the gods to support the back of the weak. It's a cherished principle, a formula for good governance. But not only for pharaohs. Maat is the standard for all Egyptians. They are to strive for justice and truth, and can be measured by it in life, in the memory of their loved ones, and at the court of the dead.
We can see Maat as a kind of constitutional law for the ancient Egyptians. That's in theory, but in reality, it was not always that nice. So we have some indications from ancient Egypt that there was corruption. For instance, we have the tale of a man from the Oasis who is complaining about misuse of royal power against him. So not always everything was so gloomy.
Not least because the power of the pharaohs is exercised by countless officials throughout the empire. They are sworn to Maat. Treat the unknown as well as the known, the near as well as the far alike. These are official rules of conduct for the state administration, something like modern compliancy rules. However, it's unlikely that they were always observed.
Of course, the system of order of the Maat applied to all people in ancient Egypt, especially to those who had a role model function, meaning the priests and the officials. But they, of course, were also just human and often cared a little more for their self-interest than for the interest of others. So on the one hand, we have an ideal conception, which everyone should strive for, yet on the other hand, we have the realities of life.
Part of the reality is, the Egyptians believe they owe everything to their gods. But justice, truth and order are not always paramount. Especially during the so-called intermediate periods, phases of upheaval and war. Chaos and disorder are what the Egyptians fear most, a fear that transcends their myths. Once, Osiris was the sole ruler of Egypt, but his brother Seth envies him. He wants the throne and all power for himself. Therefore, he murders Osiris and then dismembers him. Seth scatters his brother's limbs all over the land, thus the myth.
The intermediate periods is what Egyptologists refer to as those times when centralized government broke down. Now, it's been called the time of chaos, and sometimes there was chaos and conflict, but it wasn't total chaos. The basic socioeconomic order of Egypt at the local level was maintained. Local householders fed their people, protected them. Local nome leaders, once a leader arose that took over a whole nome, was acting like a pharaoh for those below them.
There's little known about these leaders. Their names do not appear in the king lists. There were probably just too many. During the chaotic first intermediate period, no less than 70 pharaohs are said to have ruled in as many days. Power struggles over the double crown, the dismemberment of the country and foreign rule lead to civil wars and chaotic conditions. Especially when the Nile brings too little water, thus causing famine, or when the pharaohs don't fulfill their duty to provide for the people. Even so, revolts are fairly rare occurrences in the course of 3,000 years. For in the mythology of the Egyptians, Seth, the god of chaos, has a potent opponent, Isis, not only sister, but also wife of Osiris. She reassembles her brother's limbs scattered all over Egypt by Seth and heals him. Having taken on the form of a falcon, Isis finally allows herself to be impregnated by her brother consort. Their common son is the falcon god Horus, the patron god of the pharaohs. The myth of Osiris II serves to legitimize the hereditary monarchy of the pharaohs. This is what Isis looks like in human form. She's shown here as the mother of God with the son of Horus. She may look familiar. Isis can be seen as a model for Mary, Mother of God. She's still popular among Christians in Egypt today. Up to 10% of the population profess the Coptic faith, one of the oldest Christian denominations.
One of the key deities for the ancient Egyptians was the goddess Isis. Isis means set or throne, and her mythology is very complex. And the idea was that, in fact, she was one of the creators. She was great of magic. She managed to put her dismembered husband together and make him live again. She gives birth to Horus, who becomes the ruler of Egypt. And in fact, all rulers of Egypt are regarded as a living Horus because they are the incarnation of this god.
During more than 3,000 years of ancient Egypt's history, there were numerous pharaohs, both known and unknown. But one of them wants to overthrow everything with a revolution from above. Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten. At his side, Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, as her name is translated. Hidden under desert sands for millennia, then, in 1891, a complete city is rediscovered. Even the town sign has survived to this day, carved in stone. I build Akhenaten on the side of the sunrise, in a place chosen by god Aten himself. And this is how the place that Aten chose for himself once looked, according to archaeologists. Akhenaten. In 1347 BC, the city for the sun god Aten begins to rise from the desert sands near present-day Amarna. The founder of the city, Amenhotep IV. It's the first true-to-life portrayal of a pharaoh ever. He renames himself Akhenaten after the god Aten and tears down the heaven of the gods of Egypt, a revolution. Instead of a multitude of deities, Akhenaten worships one god above all others. Aten, the solar disk. Thou only God, whose like is not. Akhenaten feels chosen to spread the new faith of a single deity and tries to enforce it with radical means.
Many people think that Akhenaten, because he raised the sun god Aten above all other gods, was a monotheist. But actually he was more of what we would call a henotheist, with one god sort of high above all others. So it wasn't as if all the other gods were blocked out from Akhenaten's reign. Certainly the god Amun was, and the Aten and Akhenaten himself was the god incarnate.
In modified form, Akhenaten's famous hymn to the sun is found even in the Bible. Beautiful you appear on the horizon of heaven, you living sun. Distant art thou, yet thy rays are on earth. All cattle are satisfied with their herbage. Trees and herbs are green. Thou who makest the semen develop in women, who makest waters to become men, who givest breath to keep all creatures alive. The new supreme god Aten is the only one to be given a temple in the center of the city of Amarna. A temple without a roof, just an open courtyard with a sacrificial altar. For Aten's rays shall reach the pharaoh and the people directly. And this is the image of the new religion. Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti receiving the rays of Aten. And there is none other that knoweth thee, save thy son, Akhenaten. As the son of Aten, Akhenaten alone knows the revelations of his God, and something else is completely new. Nefertiti is at eye level with the pharaoh. Together with her children, they form the prototype of the Holy Family. There is nothing like this before or since in ancient Egypt. Alas, what's new too is the persecution of dissenters and their gods and statues.
The religion of Akhenaten was definitely special. He did something that had never been done before. He persecuted the god Amun. One reason for this is that he had clashed with the enormously powerful Amun priesthood, which we may compare with the Vatican. The Amun priests held decisive positions alongside the king, but pitting one god against another had a completely new quality.
Akhenaten, a fundamentalist through and through, has Amun and his priesthood persecuted. His goal? To impose Aten as the highest god of Egypt. Inscriptions of the former imperial god Amun are destroyed, his statues overturned, his temples left to decay. Akhenaten is the prophet and the founder of a religion. Like Moses, who according to the Bible leads the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery, and conveys to them the first commandment of Yahweh: "Ye shall have no other gods beside me." Aten, in the form of a sun disk, shines for all people. However, the Egyptians are not overly enthusiastic about the new singular god. They don't want to give up their old gods. Belief in Aten remains a religion of the elite, supported only by Akhenaten and his court in Amarna. His religious dogmatism leads to resistance among the people. Egyptians continue to worship and sacrifice to the old gods in secret and want them back.
People do whatever Pharaoh does, but when he shut down the temples, like of Amen and Amen-Re and the other temples, if he did that, if he was shutting the temples down, he's basically shutting down the Federal Reserve System and the whole banking system of Egypt, because it was the temples that coordinated at this point in the New Kingdom, you know, the incoming during harvest and the redistributions.
The revival of the old gods only begins with Akhenaten's successor, Tutankhamun, the living image of the god Aten, better known today as Tutankhamun. When his father Akhenaten dies in 1334 BC, he proclaims, "I will bring back the gods and reopen their temples." Amen becomes king of the many gods again, and Akhenaten's religion is cursed by the Egyptians. Akhenaten is labeled a heretic. His revolution is followed by the restoration of the old faith. The Egyptians miss Maat, the order of the many gods that govern their lives until Akhenaten's reign. Enter Ramses II, probably the most fertile of all pharaohs. He begets about 100 daughters and sons. He reigns around 1250 BC. To some historians, he's an unbridled despot, not particularly intelligent. Others see him as a far-sighted politician, a master of diplomacy. He's considered a megalomaniac, but that's probably merely in keeping with the norms and ideals of his time. The temple complexes he commissions in Luxor are of stunning dimensions. After Akhenaten's death, Ramses the Great creates a building boom yet unseen. He has a mortuary temple built for himself on the west bank of the Nile at Luxor, the Ramesseum. It's meant as a kind of atonement for the suppression of the traditional gods. The old order is restored for all to see. Akhenaten's memory is erased. The gods of Egypt take up their ancestral place again. the imperial god Amun is back at the top. The principles of Maat, order and justice, prevail again. The multitude of deities remains, until, in the 1st century AD, Christianity reaches Egypt, and the images of the gods become despicable idols. Under the reign of Ramses II, the priesthood regains its power, and he elevates himself and his successors. Until then, pharaohs have merely been considered godlike. They only become deities in the afterlife. This is not enough for Ramses II. He declares himself true man and true god, already during his lifetime. A stele donated in honor of Ramses II shows both sides of the pharaoh.
Auf dieser Stele wird ganz besonders deutlich, dass
on this stele, he holds a small figure of the goddess Maat on his hand, addressing the creator god Ptah and telling him, "I am committed to the order of the world, and I am responsible for it."
Ich bin dafür verantwortlich. Und
that signifies the level on which he communicates with the creator god. To the people, especially to the high dignitaries, he presents himself in a different way. It's a reciprocal procedure. The people get something from him, tokens of honor in gold, for example. In return, they must of course be loyal to him and follow his reasoning and plans. So here we see the king on different levels, once on the divine, once on the individual level.
With the pharaohs now established as divine, the deities too emerge again from the darkness of the temples. Once a year, during the feast of Opet, the old imperial god Amun is again taken out of the inner sanctum on a bark. Everyone is allowed to get close to the god who, according to Egyptian beliefs, is present in his statue. The feast preempts Christian traditions, like the Catholic Corpus Christi procession. From Karnak, Amun is solemnly carried onto the temple at Luxor. Here, the feast is recorded in impressive reliefs. They demonstrate that immediate relationship with the gods, previously reserved for the pharaohs, is now granted to everyone. Thus, in the time after Akhenaten, an individual intimate piety develops. Yet, like all humans, the ancient Egyptians must face a fact. Their lives are finite, and given a life expectancy of 40 to 50 years, much shorter than today. Yet what awaits them once they have died? They embark on the journey to the beautiful West. To the ancient Egyptians, the realm of the dead lies where the sun sets. So their tombs usually point to the West. They cherished the idea of living on after death, alongside the gods in the Egyptian paradise. However, they seem to have considered life on the Nile as being not too bad. They want to continue it in the hereafter, as is shown by their magnificent tombs. Initially, eternal life is reserved for queens, kings, and high officials. But then, the door to the afterlife is open to the common people too. Even ordinary Egyptians, like the stonemason Akhenaten, now meet the gods in the afterlife. On their journey to the West, they take along not only provisions, but all kinds of things beautiful or of potential use in the hereafter. Like Pharaoh Tutankhamun. True, afterlife may have been democratized, but not everyone can take along riches on that scale. The Egyptians called the paradise Iaru, the rush field, quite like the reed fields on the banks of the Nile. It's a world without worries, where you may cultivate your field, hunt geese, fish, or simply relax. There's no lack of anything, be it cake or beer. Access is granted only to him whose soul is lighter than the feather of Maat at the judgment of the dead. Eternal life to anyone who passes the trials of the heart, a most comforting promise. But why only think about the end? Follow the beautiful day. Let not thy heart be weary in drinking and eating, in intoxication and lust. Forget about death. Follow the heart.
The ancient Egyptians were really amongst the leaders in the ancient world at thinking that life didn't end at death. In fact, life continued on, and in a better way. So you had the Greeks who didn't have this, you had even the people in Mesopotamia who didn't quite have it the same way. But the Egyptians really had a well thought out idea of, there's this life, you die. If you have done a good life, lived a good life, you would continue for eternity. And this was something that was then later on clearly has influenced the great monotheistic religions, because you see it, of course, most clearly in Christianity and as well as in Islam.
Ancient Egypt and its culture exert a great fascination. Even foreign conquerors put on the double crown of the pharaohs and worship the deities of Egypt. The system of administration, which has been tried and tested for thousands of years, makes it easy for them to seize power. The persistence of ancient Egypt, even under foreign rulers, is particularly evident at the Temple of Edfu, south of Luxor. It wasn't completed until 70 BC, when the country was ruled by the Macedonian Greek dynasty of the Ptolemies. The complex is based on Egyptian temples some 1,500 years older, including scenes of gods and pharaohs. To Greeks and Romans, any foreigner was a barbarian. Not so in Egypt. Even foreign rulers are accepted if they respect Egyptian beliefs.
Was durchaus spannend war, ist, dass die Ägypter sich generell als
The Egyptians saw themselves as human beings and Egypt as the center of the world. Consequently, they held the idea that if foreigners who came to Egypt adapted to their rules and norms, they were also human beings and thus were treated and seen as equals. This led to foreigners being able to accede to high positions, both in the realm of officialdom and eventually as kings in the ruling house.
Thus, images of the gods and the temples of the Egyptians are not destroyed by the Greeks or the Romans. They embrace their culture and opt for conciliation. Amen is simply equated with Zeus, the Greeks' father of the gods. Isis becomes the Roman goddess of love, Venus, with her dress raised. New multicultural metropolises emerge, such as Alexandria, founded by the Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great. He has a temple built for a new Hellenistic Egyptian god, Serapis, who combines characteristics of both pantheons.
Egyptian religious beliefs changed over time, but certain deities maintained their power right from the beginning, all the way, in fact, into the Roman period, and were even taken abroad by the Romans as far away as Britain.
As early as 5,000 years ago, a centralized state is established in ancient Egypt, with a single ruler at its head. Society is held together by the belief in a divine order and life after death. For 3,000 years, godlike pharaohs rule autocratically and unchallenged over the empire on the Nile, a legacy that has left its mark to this day.
Europe took over the ancient Egyptian way of rule, which means starting with the hereditary monarchy of Emperor Augustus, it became a way of succession of the rule that was legitimized by the divine right of the emperor and of the king. Until today, there are constitutional variants of this hereditary monarchy.
There were, of course, many other areas that have been explored by the ancient Egyptians, inventions that have been made, but from their basic norms, such as the Maat system, certain ideas were carried over into the present day and into our concepts of being.
Ancient Egypt leaves behind much more than magnificent temples and impressive pyramids. Some inventions and ideas have remained cornerstones of state and society until today.